The last time there was a storm in your area, your birds left before it started. Not a little before, a lot before. Before the sky changed, before you felt the air change, before anyone had checked the forecast. And you saw it. You probably didn't think much of it. The feeder empty, the yard quiet, and then the storm. And when it passed, they came back. What you don't know is how long before they knew, and how. Because what your birds detect before a storm is not the wind, it is not the rain, it is something you cannot perceive at all, and it makes them capable of predicting weather with more accuracy than any app on your phone. Welcome back to Backyard Bird Mind. Subscribe before you leave, because today we are going inside the sensory systems that make your backyard birds the most sophisticated weather instruments on the planet. And the last thing we cover changes the way you read the behavior of every bird you watch from this day forward. Keep watching until point 4, because that is where the behavior you can actually observe from your kitchen window comes in, and it will change what you see every time a storm approaches for the rest of the time you watch birds. Number 1. The pressure drop your birds feel hours before you do. The most fundamental difference between what a bird experiences before a storm and what you experience comes down to a structure in a bird's inner ear called the Vitali organ. The Vitali organ is a pressure-sensing structure that detects changes in barometric pressure with extraordinary sensitivity. Research published in the Journal of Experimental Biology has documented that birds can detect pressure changes as small as 1 hectopascal, a change so subtle that human ears register nothing, and that most standard barometers take significant time to confirm. A typical approaching low-pressure storm system begins dropping the barometric pressure many hours before the storm arrives. Hours during which the human beings in its path have no physical sensation of anything changing. The sky may still look clear, the air may still feel calm. Your birds know. The moment barometric pressure begins to fall, the Vitali organ sends a signal. The bird's behavior begins to change in response to information your own nervous system cannot access. This is not instinct in the vague sense people sometimes mean. It is a real-time sensory reading of the atmosphere, processed and acted on before any human in the same location has any physical awareness that weather is coming. Think about the last time your feeder emptied out for no obvious reason. The morning everything went quiet 2 hours before the clouds appeared. That was not coincidence. That was a bird following a pressure reading with greater sensitivity than any instrument you own. Number 2. The sound of a storm from 300 miles away. Here is where it becomes extraordinary. Birds hear sounds you cannot hear. Specifically, birds hear infrasound, sound frequencies below 20 Hz, the lower limit of human hearing. The infrasound range is completely silent to you. You have never heard it. You have no equipment in your body for detecting it. A major storm system, a hurricane, a severe thunderstorm complex, a large low-pressure system moving across the continent, produces infrasound as it develops.
The energy of a large storm radiates outward at these sub-20 Hz frequencies, traveling hundreds of miles ahead of the storm itself, passing through walls, through hills, through everything. Research from the University of California studying bird responses to infrasound found that some species can detect and respond to storm-produced infrasound at distances of up to 500 miles from the storm. Birds begin to respond to a storm that is still 2 states away. This is why the timeline you observe from your backyard feels so strange. Birds disappearing hours before anything visible happens is not a sensitivity to weather. It is a response to a sound the storm is making before it arrives, from a distance you cannot see on a clear day. When your yard goes quiet in the morning and there is nothing on the radar, there may be something on the radar it has not found yet. Here's the part that most people find hardest to believe. Stay with it. Number 3. The magnetic signal that arrives before the clouds. There is a third sensory channel that birds use to read approaching weather, and it is the one most people find hardest to believe. Storms distort the Earth's magnetic field. Large, low-pressure systems and their associated electrical activity create measurable geomagnetic disturbances that precede the visible weather by hours. The same magnetic sensing system that birds use for navigation, the cryptochrome-based magnetoreception in their eyes, and the magnetite deposits in their beaks, is also sensitive to these disturbances. Research on European starlings and migratory songbirds has documented behavioral changes in response to geomagnetic disturbances that correlate with incoming weather systems.
The birds are reading the magnetic field the same way a ship reads a compass, and when that field shifts in the patterns associated with storm systems, the birds respond. Your backyard birds are not just checking the barometric pressure and listening for infrasound. They are also reading the magnetic signature of approaching weather. They have 3 independent early warning systems running simultaneously. Any one of them would make them more sensitive to approaching storms than you are. All 3 together make them something else entirely. And here is what matters most about this. These 3 systems do not require a large brain or complex reasoning to operate. A chickadee weighing 11 grams with a brain roughly the size of a pea is running real-time atmospheric monitoring that outperforms anything a human can do without instruments. The sophistication is not in the processing, it is in the hardware. Evolution built sensory equipment into birds over millions of years that we have only begun to understand in the last few decades. The small animals at your feeder on a calm Tuesday morning are doing things that science is still figuring out how to measure. Number 4. What they actually do with the information. Knowing a storm is coming is not the same as knowing what to do about it. Birds do very specific things in the hours before a storm arrives, and understanding those behaviors changes the way you read your yard. The first response is feeding. When birds detect an approaching storm through pressure, infrasound, or magnetic signals, many species dramatically increase their foraging activity. They are loading up on calories before weather that will make foraging impossible or dangerous. If you see your feeders suddenly extremely active, birds arriving faster than usual, spending more time eating than watching, multiple species at the feeders simultaneously that would not normally tolerate each other, it is worth noting the time and then watching the weather for the next several hours. This feeding surge can happen when the sky is still completely clear. You are watching animals responding to information they received before the atmosphere gave you any visible signal. The feeder that seems unusually busy on a calm morning is often the most accurate storm forecast in your neighborhood. The second response is the one you have almost certainly observed: disappearance. After the feeding surge, birds move to shelter. Dense vegetation, tree cavities, protected structures, the downwind side of buildings. They are not leaving your yard because they do not like it. They are going to the safest place they know to wait out what they know is coming. Research from multiple institutions studying storm preparation behavior in wild birds has documented that the timing and intensity of these behavioral changes are correlated with the severity of the incoming storm. A minor rain shower produces a mild feeding surge and mild sheltering behavior. A significant severe weather event produces a dramatic, rapid disappearance that happens hours earlier and with a completeness that can feel startling. The next time your yard goes suddenly completely quiet, note it. Check the forecast for the next 12 to 18 hours. You may find that the birds read it before the meteorologists did. Number 5. What comes back and what that tells you. The storm passes, the pressure rises, the infrasound quiets, the magnetic field settles, and the birds come back. What you may not have noticed is the order in which they return. The timing and sequence of birds returning to your yard after a storm is not random. It follows a pattern that reflects the species' specific relationship to risk and energy. Small, high-metabolism birds like chickadees and titmice are often among the first to return because they cannot afford to wait. A chickadee has such a high metabolic rate that it can burn through its fat reserves in a matter of hours during cold or wet weather. After sheltering through a significant storm, their energy reserves are dangerously low and they need to feed immediately or face a genuine survival crisis. Larger birds with more body mass and more energy reserves can afford to wait longer and often do. The cardinal you expect to arrive first at your feeder after a storm may actually arrive well after the chickadees. The hierarchy of post-storm return is largely a story of who can least afford to wait. Watch this the next time a significant storm passes your yard. Watch who returns first and how urgently they feed. The bird that arrives first and feeds most aggressively is the bird that came closest to its energy limit while waiting out what the others had told it was coming. Because they told each other. The alarm calls that circulate through a yard before a storm, the calls that silence the normal morning activity and signal the shelter behavior, are not just individual responses, they are communication. The birds in your yard are sharing the information their sensory systems are receiving, calling the others to shelter when any one of them reads the signal clearly enough.
Your yard is running a weather network you have never been able to hear. The feeder goes empty. The yard goes quiet. The storm arrives. You have watched this happen many times. You probably filed it under coincidence, under something birds just do, under the general category of things that happen in a yard without explanation. What you were actually watching was one of the most sophisticated environmental sensing systems on the planet, running in the small bodies of animals that weigh less than a handful of change. 3 sensory channels you do not possess, a communication network you cannot hear, a weather prediction that was more accurate than the forecast on your phone. Your birds detected the pressure falling. They heard the infrasound from hundreds of miles away. They read the magnetic signature of the approaching low. They called to each other, and they moved to shelter with enough lead time to survive what was coming, hours before the first drop of rain. They do not know what barometric pressure is. They have never heard of the Vitali organ. They do not think about infrasound or geomagnetic disturbances. They simply feel the world changing in ways you have never been able to feel, and they respond to what they feel with everything they have. And when it is over, they come back to your feeder, because your yard is the place they decided is worth returning to, every time. That is not a small thing. That is a wild animal with 3 atmospheric sensing systems choosing your yard specifically as the place it weathers the storm. Tell me in the comments, have you ever noticed your birds disappear before a storm? What was the timing? How long before the rain did your yard go quiet? I want to know the specific story. I read every one. I'll see you in the next one.